Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, welcome. How are you doing today? I'm really glad you're here. We're going to do something different this week. I had listeners send in their questions that they wanted to have answered, and this letter that I'm going to read to you is just, I love that it's incredibly rich and detailed with all kinds of specifics that this person struggles with. I'm going to break down what they wrote and answer in small chunks, and we'll see how it goes. This may end up being a 2-part episode. I'm not sure, so we'll see. So here's the letter that I got from a listener. I seem to have a lot of difficulty in intimate, close relationships. When things get stressful or difficult, I tend to be afraid and have different conversations and get self-conscious about what I'm saying, how I feel. I see my side and the other side, so it's tough to weed through what's what at times. It gets especially tough in the heat of an argument where I have to express my opinions and feelings then and there. I find my brain gets jumbled, I panic and shut down. And when I do express myself and the other person doesn't understand, it only makes things worse. I doubt myself and often feel wrong. I hear this so much from people. Our depth of processing can make it really hard to respond in the moment because we need time to absorb and digest and respond. It's also very common for HSPs to have this ability to what I call perspective shift, that we're able to identify with what our perspective is and the other person's perspective. And it's not uncommon for other people, the other 80%, to not have that ability. And so their lens is often, their perspective is the one perspective. And we've got this amazing ability to understand multi-facets to a situation. It's also not uncommon to have panic during confrontation or conflict and to shut down. That can be about trauma from our childhood, not having the practice and having somebody help us identify and express what's going on in the moment. It's very common to have self-doubt. If the discussion is heated, it's also possible that a trauma response may be activated and you're in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn and not able to access your frontal lobe, which is where reasoning and logic is. So the part of your brain that's had trauma gets activated and it's very hard to be able to kind of grab your reasoning. What may need to happen is you may need to come back to the discussion after a cooling off period. There's nothing wrong with this. And after you're more regulated, you're able to process through what happened and what you would have liked to have said. And often what I tell my clients when they come to me with these types of situations is, what would you have liked to have said? And sometimes it means having to let that younger part of us really express their feelings, not necessarily back in the relationship, but that part of us that felt like we never got to have a voice. And we work with that to kind of get back to what's more regulated to say. And you can use this as a process to come from those heated responses back to something that's a little bit more moderate. The listener goes on to say, it's no surprise that I have difficulty in close relationships, though. Growing up, I didn't have a lot of emotional support, and tensions often ran high in my household. My dad and my brother had anger issues, in addition to mental health issues which were left undiagnosed, so we never knew what person we would get at any given time. We also never knew if it would escalate into plate throwing or wall punching or abandonment for hours, sometimes days. After a heated argument, my mom was there but was a peacekeeper, so she was never one to draw boundaries when it came to that behavior. I suppose that left me feeling vulnerable and unprotected in a sense, which left me to develop a strong sense of independence from the family unit. Of course, you're going to have this kind of a response, that unpredictability and not knowing what was going to happen, having to anticipate or predict possible behavior on any range of the spectrum is very stressful. And I would imagine that that would activate a sense of hypervigilance. having to be prepared for different versions of people due to mental health issues, substance abuse, anger dysregulation. Anger can be really scary for a young child, and that can last through adulthood if we haven't had the corrective experience around anger and expression of anger. So who else has a reaction when someone else is angry? Raised voices, slamming doors, if someone's slamming cupboards or they're frustrated. Who doesn't have that reaction? I would imagine for those of you that did not grow up and have any trauma, that may not be something that activates you. But for most of us, that is going to activate a fearful response. It can activate a sense of abandonment, uncertainty. No one was there to protect you and to set limits and to keep you safe when you were a child. Your mom was there, but she really wasn't in a protector role, so you were unprotected. This leads to hyperindependence and a sense of hypervigilance. You weren't allowed to have wants or needs, but what happens is we have these amazing protective defense mechanisms that help us survive and protect us. What is going to be really helpful is being able to understand this and cultivating a lot of compassion for that younger part and what she had to do to survive. We learn these adaptive coping strategies for survival, but are they serving us now? Generally, they aren't. As you do your healing, you can begin to separate out that younger wounded version that shows up in your adult relationships. And I talked about this in previous episodes, that many of us that have wounding have these younger parts that show up in our adult relationships. It generally doesn't work out really well. What you want to do is to heal that younger part and tending to her needs so she doesn't show up in your adult relationships. And then the second part is learning the skills as an adult that we need to bring to our adult relationships, because many of us just didn't get this. We didn't learn this. It wasn't modeled. So how would we know how to have these skills? And then the listener goes on to say, when I was vulnerable with my feelings or had any negative emotion, I was shut down relatively quickly. On bad days, I was scolded. It's not safe for me to feel anger, frustration, deep feelings of any kind. And dealing with other people's emotions on top of mine was too much to handle, so I often ignored my feelings to keep peace. Well, no one was able to be there for you to be a container for your feelings, which is what young children need. We need somebody to model and to co-regulate with us, to show you that all of your feelings are okay. Your feelings are not scary, they're not dangerous, they're not too much, but no one was there to help you co-regulate. And so what happened is, to survive, you had to abandon your authentic self and become what you needed to be to survive in your family system. Intellectual, being a caregiver, a people pleaser, a peacekeeper, not having wants and needs. Now the goal is to give that younger self who was shut down a voice. She needs to be heard, seen, validated, and to process how hard, scary, frustrating it was, because nobody's really ever given her any airtime. She had to shut down. Survival is about focusing externally and abandoning our authentic selves. Healing is about turning inward and learning what you are feeling, thinking, and needing. We often didn't learn how to be in relationship with ourselves. How can we be in relationship with others when we never learned how to show up for ourselves? And then the listener goes on to say, I notice a high sensitivity to negative emotions now. I don't want to be around my partner or anyone who can't see silver linings. If someone is in a bad mood, I don't want to be around them. And if I have to be, then my mood turns sour. Once they're happy again, I'm left feeling icky from their mood, prior in the day or even week. This is often a trauma response, a result of C-PTSD. Also with differential susceptibility, when we are in highly negative, angry environments that it wasn't safe, we're going to be impacted more so than the non-HSP. It can be a trauma response. All feelings are okay, and we often, I hate using labels, but I think in this case it's appropriate to talk about codependence, wanting to control how others feel because it makes you feel uncomfortable. And for those of us that didn't learn how to express feelings growing up, we really learned what we had to do to make sure that nobody got mad, nobody got angry. And so our ability to tolerate discomfort around other people's feelings tends to be pretty high. An example of how this shows up is It's not uncommon to have competing needs in relationships, and this week something came up where what I needed was not what my husband needed. He said it made him feel sad, and I couldn't tell if this was my issue or his because it felt like he was withdrawing. I asked him about it. He said he wasn't. I couldn't really tell. What happened is this activated my discomfort. I didn't want him to be having feelings about it, and it made me very uncomfortable. Where I wanted to go was to pick a fight with him. I wanted to come up with all the reasons why in our relationship over the past 24 years, where I haven't said anything because I wanted to be agreeable, because then the focus would be on me being upset and frustrated with him as opposed to me having to sit with potential discomfort that he was having feelings around me, having a different need than he has. I didn't do this. I recognized it. I reached out to someone that I trust to talk about it, to remind myself how uncomfortable I felt because he was having feelings. Even though we do the healing work, this stuff still comes up. Had I not done my own work, I probably would have totally jumped on him and given him a litany of things that he's done to shift the focus, and we don't have to do that. Also, all feelings are energy. They're not good or bad. It's just energy. And working with someone who can help us learn to co-regulate so we don't get overwhelmed with feelings. Learning what's yours and what's not yours and cultivating compassion for the other person if it's just a healthy expression of feelings. We often have competing needs in relationships, like I shared with the example with my husband. Conflict is normal and healthy, but most of us feel uncomfortable with that and avoid conflict and discomfort at all costs. Provided that the other person is not toxic or acting out and they're just having feelings, we need to be okay with our messy feelings as well as the messy feelings of others. How can we create safety for ourselves and still allow all feelings, again, provided that they're not dangerous or toxic? But when we haven't been able to express our own feelings of discomfort, displeasure, disappointment, sadness, frustration, we don't know how to manage that in ourselves. And if somebody else is modeling that or experiencing that, that can be very, very uncomfortable. The listener goes on to say, my independence has been a safe haven. Being on my own means being in control of my environment, experiences, and feelings, and not having to justify or explain them. Also, not having to deal with other people's needs, wants, and emotions. Insert self-judgment here. Yep, this is a very effective trauma response. Do you have the intimacy and closeness in your life that you want? If you're okay with this, then you don't need to make any changes, but this is a trauma response. It was adaptive. You couldn't count on anybody and you had to create your own reality, your own existence. But if you want to have connection with other people, this may not be working. We need to have interdependence. It's healthy. If this is working and you want to be alone, no conflict, not dealing with others, then keep doing this. But we're wired for connection, and that means that it's going to get messy. We also get this beautiful connection, intimacy, and a sense that we're not alone and that somebody else gets us. When we start having a relationship with ourselves and we learn to embrace our own messy, the stuff we want to hide, that we were taught was not acceptable, that too muchness, and we get comfortable with it, then we have more capacity for other people's messiness. And when we can see each other in our beautiful, messy glory, there is such amazing healing that happens from that space. The listener goes on to say, ironically, since I was 18, I've had 3 long-term relationships and some casual ones in between, which meant only being single for approximately 2 years combined of my adult life. Now that I'm older, I'm starting to appreciate my independence more than I ever have and realize how authentically I was when I was on my own. It was fun, relatively stress-free, and it was all me. I wish away my current relationship because it's so difficult for me sometimes, and the grass feels greener on that single side. There's a lot of guilt that comes with these feelings, needs, and wants, and I don't feel normal to have them. While my friends are marrying and having babies, I want to run in the opposite direction and be on my own for the rest of my life. I'm sure that it would be lonely, but maybe it would be easier, better, less difficult. Some HSPs do prefer to remain single. There really is no right or wrong. If it's coming from a place of trauma and choosing to not do healing, are you okay with that? The grass will always be greener. Comparison is the thief that we get caught up in. In a relationship, you will have competing needs and need to compromise. If you're alone, you miss the gift of companionship. They both have positives and drawbacks, and I'm not really in a place to say whether one should have one or the other. It's totally fine to choose to be on your own, and I think that that comes from a place of trauma. Since I know that it's me in relationships and not any one person in particular, I suppose I'd like to know how to heal this part of myself so that I can have close relationships, friendship or romantic, without feeling like the world is caving in when things get tough. The healing work is really about rebuilding the relationship with yourself. When you were a child, you could not be your authentic self, and so that jubilant, joyful, expressive child had to learn to shut everything down and to figure out what the adults in the environment could tolerate. When you're alone, there's a sense of freedom that you can be who you are, but when you bring anybody else into the mix, then that changes it. If you want to have intimacy and closeness in your life, then the next step is to do the healing work and practice it in relationships with people who are safe and have done enough of their own work so that you both work on your stuff together. Often this starts in a structured setting like therapy, coaching, a structured group. We often don't know what we're thinking or feeling, or we haven't even done enough work to be able to let other people know. We don't know how to identify what healthy relationships look like. We don't know how to identify red flags. We don't have outside support, friends, a therapist, a coach to help guide us when our history gets activated. We have to sort this out and figure out, is this something that's happening now or is this a history? It has to do with doing the healing work. And then the listener goes on to say, how can we separate how we feel versus how someone else's feels? How can we navigate arguments calmly and to avoid overwhelm? How can we find value in people who are close to us versus pushing them away, judging them when things get tough? Part of the work is figuring out what's mine and what's somebody else's. And I often will put my hand on my heart and take a few deep breaths and I'll ask, is this mine or is this someone else's? There's energy work that we can do to prevent taking on other people's feelings and to create distance if we know we're going into a situation where we're likely to take on stuff that isn't ours. As we learn to identify what we're thinking, feeling, and needing, it can become easier to recognize patterns that are going on with other people, and then we just watch things unfold and we go, oh, this is not my stuff. When our stuff collides with someone else's, it is going to be harder, and until you're more adept at deciphering, having a therapist, a coach, a trusted friend who's done their work can help, someone that you can use as a sounding board. Journaling after the fact can also help. Attachment injuries will also come up when things get intimate or uncomfortable. I've posted a link in the show notes and the show notes from episode 109 with Jessica Fern on attachment. It's very powerful, and I think our attachment injuries really are the foundation for setting up our relationships. Do we tend to run, hide, defend, or minimize the importance of the relationship when things get uncomfortable? Judgment often comes from fear and or shame, wanting to, like the example that I gave you, wanting to focus on my husband when I'm feeling uncomfortable, to pick a fight or to bring up historical stuff. It's easy to deflect and to not sit with our own discomfort and to focus outward, which is what we started talking about in the beginning, that we're very good at focusing on others and not so great at focusing on ourselves and our own discomfort. And then the listener goes on to say, I hope this gives you some context and insight into the comment that they had shared, and I asked for more information, and they hope that it wasn't too intense for me. Again, we have this sense that we feel really overwhelmed and dysregulated, and we assume that because our caregivers couldn't manage or handle our feelings, we're also going to overwhelm other people. It's very, very common. I am so grateful to this listener for this beautiful, descriptive narrative about the things that they experience, because I'm sure each and every one of you heard a piece of yourself in this. We can have healthy relationships. We can be in relationship with others. Most of us have wounding. That's why I have this podcast and I talk to you about the things that I struggle with, because we need to have healthy modeling around this and know that what goes on with us is okay. The defense mechanisms that we have are often, they were adaptive. They kept us alive. And if they're not working now, we have an opportunity to do healing so we really can have that connection that we crave and to know that we are lovable when we are messy and crabby and frustrated and all of the things that we hide and try and show our best selves to others. And when we do that healing, we can find relationships that we can show up in 100% of the time, regardless of what's going on. If some of this resonated with you and you're ready to do a little bit of work, I have maybe 1 or 2 spots open at the time of this recording, which won't be coming out for a few weeks. People come and go, so I may have spots. If you're interested, you can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive.com. The online HSP course will be starting in January. Registration will open mid-December and will end at the end of December. I will be having an episode or 2 come out interviewing some people who have taken the online HSP course in the past. If you're interested, you can go to my website. There's lots of videos and podcasts with people who have taken the course. I think that's it for today. I hope you were doing well. I guess the take home is that you can look at your relationships and maybe make a list of the things that are working and the things that you're struggling with and see if you need some support around those things. And if you're feeling content in your relationship, can you identify what healthy conflict is? Can you identify what red flags are? Can you identify when you get activated in your history and that young part shows up in your relationships? I hope you're doing well. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.